Welcome to the Unearthed Life podcast. I am here with Eugene Luning. He is a lay pastor of our church, and we love him and his wife. And he is also going to school to finish his doctorate and has book projects on the side. So he is a man of many gifts and talents. And I am glad he's here, willing to have this conversation with me, because I think he has a lot to offer and to share. Just for everyone to get to know who you are, how is God loving you recently? Where are you seeing him in your life?
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a joy to be with you. I would say lately, I'm a big fan of always having at least one foot, maybe both feet in the Gospels. And I would say lately, there have been a lot of moments where I've been stopped in my tracks by just very simple words spoken from the lips of Jesus that they bring me to a very centered place just for that day. And so, I think of a day or two ago where he was actually correcting the Pharisees and talked about, you're not even going into the kingdom and yet you're keeping others from outside. And in the way that he just said going into, just those two words, I was so moved and thought, wow, I want to spend my day going into the kingdom. So I would say it's just been pairs of words, a few words that have been feeling like he's saying them to me lately, which then makes each day feel very intimate with him. So I think that's kind of how it's been maybe for the last couple of months.
That's awesome. I know you're so into words and like the emphasis of what a word means. I love that. I think that sticks out to me as well. I want to let you talk about a couple of books that you have coming out and dive into those a little bit. The first one is Pointillisms. I don't even know what that means.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you about it.
Yeah.
First, I'll tell you what it's kind of about, how it's constructed, and then I'll
Yeah.
explain maybe why I called it that.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was working on my master's, there was actually three different parts to what I was working on in my thesis. One part was a eminent 20th century philosopher, Ludwig Wittgenstein, who his famous only lifetime published work, the Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, was written in this very terse, short sentence length at times, a very short paragraph at times, explication of what he really thought was the nature of logic and philosophy. And as I was researching and studying and reading it all the time, I realized I would love the challenge to myself of starting in Genesis 1 and going to Revelation to the end of the book and really trying to break out what is going on, what is the heart of God, what is the heart for man of God, throughout every single chapter, every single verse of the entirety of the scripture. So it was like a couple-year project of creating these really point length, sentence, two sentences, maybe at most 3 or 4 sentences, just breakouts of what is the heart of the Lord for us. And then the reason it's called pointillisms is because obviously it's short points. And if you know anything about impressionistic painting, pointillism is where they would make beautiful designs with literal points. And so I thought that's a good title for this book, because if you read only a few points at a time, hopefully it would encourage your heart and draw you into a deeper place of discipleship. But also I think it's establishing a better picture of both the nature of the Lord and also human nature. So that's Pointillisms. And then my other strangely named book that you haven't named yet, but I'll just dive into it,
Yeah, go.
is it's called To Be Eaten in the Wind. And this also was a part of my master's thesis. And it was about, while Henry David Thoreau, classic 19th century American philosopher, thinker, ecological guy, when he would literally physically walk around Concord, Massachusetts, he would write in his journal. And I started finding, as I was researching around some of his journal work, that there were these beautiful layered philosophical thoughts. I kind of describe them as a practical phenomenology. Like, how do we interact with the world around us, stimuli, phenomena? And so that book is actually 52 of his walks in their entirety, just given to you. And then it kind of allows you to sort of meditate on, what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to wake up in the morning and interact both with nature and people? So it's obviously more of a secular text, but it's something I would like to teach from in my future hopeful kind of professorial dreams in the future. Those are my couple of very strangely named and in a way strange books that are hopefully coming out fairly soon.
I'm sure they're not strange books. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot.
Well, I think they're a little strange, but I think we're all a little strange, and that's just great.
these couple books are soon to be out. Or are they out yet?
Well, both of they already have like an ISBN number, so they're kind of like technically out there. The publisher I'm working with, we've been working through some cover design things, and so they're
Mm,
not readily available yet. But I would say
okay.
certainly in 2026, probably before the summer of 2026, somewhere in there.
Good. Good.
Yeah,
We can look forward to that.
thank you.
I am fascinated by Eugene's mind and just his teachings that we get to sit under every Sunday. But what, with all the writing, with the master's, now working on a doctorate, I would love for you to share maybe some of your story, but also what is it that brought you to this place in life and your desire, passion? Do you like, what is your do you believe is your gifting and where you're going with God and all of it?
Wow. What an awesome question, and I'm honored to be asked. I would say from a very young age, and the best way I can describe it is I was somewhat haunted by the person of Jesus, not necessarily by sort of mainline Christianity, but his personality. When I would hear people talk, especially people I could really tell that knew him, it was like I could sense his presence even as a child. So I had this strange fascination that I think was like beyond my years. I think I was sort of catching up with it. I remember
Mhm.
being 13, 14 and really realizing like, oh, this is real. This is very real. Fast forward just a little bit. I lost my father when it was just before my 19th birthday. And that was a time, I'm sure a lot of people, if they're have experienced some loss, you really ask deep questions like, all right, Lord,
Mhm.
what's this all for? What's it about? Because I am struggling. And I really felt like, so now we're up into my, 19, 20-year-old space. I really felt like he invited me into the Gospels in a very intense way. And it
Mhm.
was a question of like, I think you know about me, but I want you to come and really know me. And I would say that really defined my 20s, was just this sort of relentless quest to know his actual heart and spirit. And through that period of time, I met Jenny, and she had an equal passion as we got married and started having kids to really know him, not just sort of beat around the bush,
Mhm.
but really to like speak first-handedly of him. So I think that was a lot
Mhm.
of our 20s. And then right before we turned 30, we took a lot of Young Life kids on a houseboat trip to Lake Powell. And we were there with a couple of friends that I know you know. And these
Mhm.
were two people who, the best way to describe it is, there something had happened between them and the Holy Spirit that I had never seen before. Growing up as a very conservative Presbyterian, I thought it was a little strange for a couple of days, and then I realized what they were walking in was kind of the whole thing. And so I
Mhm.
remember sort of confessing this to the Lord, like, Lord, I don't think I know your spirit at all. And
Mhm.
I think it was the next day or the day after, had a very palpable sense of like, whoa, Holy Spirit, this is real. And so now that was sort of a new experiential stage with the Lord Jesus. And I would say since then, so now I was about 30, now I'm 45. It's really just been this day by day adventure of being very serious about being in the Word, but also taking it and trying it out, seeing how the love of Jesus interacts with the lives of people who know nothing about him, maybe have no
Mhm.
interest in knowing about him. And so I think that keeps me really delighted in the scriptures and sort of nimble to how his spirit would teach, and even how he would then teach me to do. I often say it's very experimental for me. I just really want to know him. And if he says something that he would like me to be about or to do, I just do it and see what happens. I have a dear friend,
Mhm.
Mike, who always describes it as the spirit of whimsy. Whatever he
Yeah.
asks, let's give it a shot and see what happens. So I think that's kind of both my heartbeat and Jenny's heartbeat when we
Mhm.
speak of him. We want it to feel a little different and really firsthand. When I'm out in the world, when I'm rock climbing with your husband Alex at the gym, like, you just really want to have like this, hey, we're having an experience with Jesus right now. And if we
Yeah.
get to share about that with somebody we're standing next to or meeting up with for coffee, awesome. But I don't know. I guess that's the hopefully not too long way of explaining kind of how it's been woven into my own journey of life, and feels like it's kind of always still happening, which is the joy of it.
Yeah. I would love for you to share more about I guess, your heart for the people who don't know Jesus, because
Mm.
you have no reserve on going, hey, do you like want to talk about this? And,
Yeah.
seeing that, but just in a, I guess, loving, approachable, like you are whimsical, you are just kind in bringing it to the conversation.
Mm. Mm.
And like, what is that in you? And what do you feel like God's doing in that?
Well, thank you. These are great questions. What's interesting is I would say I rarely bring it up, which is an odd thing to say in answer to your
Yeah.
question, because I really want both the spirit of Jesus and I want my behavior toward people to be the welcome mat for a conversation. So I'll give an example would be, I just already named it, but I love climbing and I especially love climbing with Alex. And I often find that at the climbing gym, what an opportunity to encourage people.
Mhm.
I'm always struggling there. I'm always trying to figure out
Mhm.
some move or some route. And I always am looking at people around me and I'm like, boy, they look like they could use some encouragement. And I just find that to
Mhm.
be one way just to really love people and make sure they feel seen in the midst of trying something that's hard. And so interestingly, the more and more you do that, the more that becomes sort of your atmosphere and really your
Mhm.
reputation, say at
Mhm.
that gym, or maybe it's at the school that you pick up your kids at every day. But if this becomes the reputation, eventually in the midst of life, it begs the question, why are you this way? And I think one of my climbing partners laughs a lot because he's like, people always ask you that. And I'm like, I don't know what it's about. But people will be like, hey, why are you so encouraging? Like, what's your story? And it's interesting because I've thought about this for years. How do you actually explain yourself as a follower of Jesus?
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
what I say, here's my little script. It's not a script, it's just what I say. I often say to people, I get the chance to write about and speak about Jesus. And when I say that, I really mean kind of like the authentic way of Jesus. And then
Mhm.
people say, authentic way of Jesus. What do you mean by
Mhm.
that? And I just say, well, I think what he intended to do with people is probably quite different from what we people have made it to be. So I'm just
Mhm.
trying to get back to really where it all started. And I think that conversation, you and I can completely understand each other when we say that. I think it's very inviting because I think the world around us is quite aware that there have been many
Mhm.
missteps in the history of Christianity. And so for us to be authentic and actually wake up in the morning and try and follow his words and his calls to obedience, I think it's kind of arresting. And I think people say, okay, tell me more. And it's amazing how many coffees and lunches and walks with people I've taken based on that conversation. Maybe they've been hurt by the church. I'll take walks with friends who are Zen Buddhist and they're like, that sounds so
Mhm.
interesting. It sounds so interestingly close to what I'm trying to do. And then we just have this rich conversation that's like honoring, but also,
Mhm.
again, I would say inviting. So
Mhm.
I just try and be my goofy self and love people and just see where it goes. And it's,
Yeah.
again, I'll use the word, it's sort of an adventure. It's kind of fun.
Yeah. I love that. And I think people do know that about you. Will say that, like, when people around you, Eugene, that you are inviting, that you're not afraid of a conversation and to approach something hard, but you're also so knowledgeable. Like for me, that would be like, what do I say here? Like, what can I biblically
Right.
recall
Yeah.
to say
Yeah.
something? So for that, I think you have a gift and
Well,
an
thanks.
ability to do that as well. Speaking of that, so you finished your master's and now you're doing your doctorate. And
Hmm.
remind me what your doctorate is in and what was that inspiration of keep going and
Yes.
like studying?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I have to name drop here because my very dear professor in my master's program, Dr. Mary Fergal, one of the most brilliant people I've ever met.
Mm,
She's a Scotswoman and she
mhm,
was so encouraging to me as I went through my master's, and she would come back to me with such beautiful notes on things I had worked on. And she encouraged me, I really think that there's just a way that you think that you should just keep going, don't stop where you are. So we all need encouragement. And I felt
yeah.
so encouraged by her. I'm so grateful for her. And because she's from the UK, she thought perhaps the system in the UK would really fit me because it's
Mm,
more research based and
yeah.
not like taught coursework. So I applied to a couple different programs that would allow me to be back and forth. And I was delighted to be offered a place at the University of London. And there's a specific place, the Institute of Historical Research. And so that's where I am doing my research. I am researching 1940 and 41 throughout Britain. And I'm really taking a look at individuals' experience, of course, of the Blitz, of the sort of invasion fears from the Nazis. And as I've been going, I've realized it's become sort of a meditation on the human experience of time and
Mm.
temporality, and how do we live in the present? How do we release what has been? How do we stop fearing what's to be? And so I'm really also delving into some interesting thoughts around time out of all the philosophical history and trying to kind of embed that into my research writing. So again, I'm using the word, it's nerdy, it's kind of strange and esoteric, but I have a great time, except this morning when I had writer's block. I told you about that before we got
Yeah.
on. When I have writer's block, it's not fun, but it's mostly fun.
As you're going through that, like you said, blocks of time, historical, how we react in history, do you have space and ability to implement like what God's perspective?
Yes.
I mean, I know you do. Can you write about it? Can you
Yes.
implement it?
Yes. So I'm actually, that's part of that was actually when I had to apply, of course, but before I even applied, I had to write a proposal for my research. And I was very clear that I was deeply dedicated to studying and understanding the human inner life. And I said in
Mm.
my write up for my proposal, I speak of Jesus really for a living. And so to understand the nature of what had kind of mainline, but also some of the like side stems of Christianity within Britain in that period, what did it look like? What did it mean for the average Briton? Was it real? Was it just something that they did on Sunday mornings? How did it play out when fear really became the atmosphere of their lives? So that is
Yeah.
definitely in there. Even this morning I was rereading something I'd written a month or two ago. Like, for instance, in November 1940, they began having, not mandated, but it was sort of put out there by the Churchill government that at 9 o'clock, when they would play on the BBC the sound of Big Ben chiming, that
Mhm.
they were essentially saying, let this be a 1 minute call to silence, to prayer. And so you have the populace responding. Some people are going into deep kind of meditative space of prayer. Some are just being quiet. But it's interesting to see culturally how that had a thread throughout. And I have many more of those that I've been working on, but I just happened to read that about 30 minutes ago. Yeah, the silent minute, they called it, which I thought was quite interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, the broadcast. I was listening to something this morning. It's actually a talk a Catholic bishop
Hmm.
was giving that I was on, and he said, "What happened to the songs to the people?" Even he even talked about Churchill
Hmm.
and Roosevelt on their radio shows would even do some song, would inspire and encourage their people in song and poetry, speaking, and similar to the Old Testament. He's like, what happened to our singing into the lives of people and speaking and inspiring? So that was interesting when you were talking about that. I was like, hey, I just was listening to something similar to that.
I love
That's interesting. And with all of what you're doing, what do you think, do you feel like is your maybe your personal narrative and
Hmm.
like reason that
Hmm.
God's has you here and now and what you're doing?
Yes. I was very nervous back a few years ago when I started doing my master's because it didn't really necessarily align with talking about Jesus for a living and the
Mm.
things I was doing actively in ministry. And so I had that nervousness of, is this a misstep or is this something I'm just doing because it's interesting to me? But I have a dear, dear kind of spiritual mother, Lynn, who,
Mm.
when we were sitting together one day and I was sharing with her, maybe some of my anxieties around maybe this is the wrong thing. Her challenge to me, and I would challenge you and anyone I would talk to, because I think she's so right, is whatever the Lord has put into us, we need to take it as far as we can go.
Mm.
And so when we have passions and interests, and maybe it's history, maybe it's philosophy, maybe it's music, we
Mhm.
need to see how far we can take it in this lifetime. And so that's what she encouraged me with. She said, you love the life of the mind. You're fascinated by history and the lived experience. You weave it already into a lot of your talking about Jesus. So this really is just you taking it further, and don't second guess yourself. And so as I dove into that program, I suddenly realized, I think someday it would be a delight to teach in a university setting, and not probably a Christian university setting. I think it would be
Yeah.
so fun to just sit with people both in history and philosophy and share from my heart, hey, I'm trying to follow the way of Jesus, but also I'm so interested in the writings of Schopenhauer, and I already mentioned Wittgenstein, to talk
Mhm.
about these philosophers, but from a place of like, hey, I'm trying to follow Jesus and I'm fascinated with this. And it's great to know you, even if you don't know Jesus, to talk about this together and to cultivate our minds together. And so I think that's a little, as you said, like, what's my narrative? Where's the direction? That's where I sense that I'm feeling drawn, is
Mhm.
I want to be in conversation with people, especially quite different people, and see where it goes. So I think those are the seeds that have been planted in me as I do all this.
That's amazing. I totally could see you as a college professor. He
Yeah, I do think
would
it'd be fun.
love you.
Oh, that's nice. We'll see. I do need probably a nice tweed coat, probably my thicker glasses, but we'll get there, one step at a time.
You're pretty close.
Nice. Yeah. I think you've seen me in a few settings where I already looked sort of that way.
Yeah, yeah.
It's okay. We'll roll with it.
I I love Jordan B. Peterson. He
Mm,
is fascinating to me. Like it's like every time he speaks, like you just want to listen because he's got some
mm,
wisdom to give. I just saw this little clip of him saying if God gives you an idea or a feeling or something to go and learn motion over it, it
mm,
is your responsibility
mm, mm,
to follow that and
mm,
to pursue it because it is a unique speaking to you and your heart and your ability. I've been sitting with that for a
mm.
while of, there are some things I think every individual gets some inspiration, some
Yeah.
heart movement towards, and then you got to go, okay, God, what is that? And
Mm,
to pursue in the lane of Jesus of, is this something I'm supposed to pursue?
yeah.
And I love that what Linda said is just take it as far as you can.
Right.
Because if it's God given, it will keep going. And it
Right.
is your responsibility of He's given you this idea. He didn't give it to anybody else. So follow that and
Right.
follow what He has on the other side of it
I love that.
to
Well
do for
said.
people.
Well
Yeah.
said. I love that.
Yeah. But
Mm.
so in there's other books as well that you have written. Are you working on any new projects?
At this point, not right this minute. I would
Okay.
say the way I'm writing what is essentially my doctoral thesis,
Oh, yeah.
I would say it's going to be pretty readable, and it's going to take me years more. So I would say it may have a book-like quality, or maybe part of it could be sliced out of the boring academic stuff to become a more readable text for just people who are interested in Second World War history. So I would say that's kind of it right now, and I'm mostly enjoying it. Some days I'm struggling, but most days I feel that little nugget of inspiration. So that's kind of it right now.
Do you have any? I know we didn't talk about this before, but maybe you could come up with something. Any like book or thing that you would encourage people to learn from?
Yes, that's a great question. I would say when I encounter people who are really fascinated, I've already spoken to this, they're fascinated by just how it jumps off the page, like the living personality of Jesus.
Mhm.
Not just reading and sort of putting it into our brain in a really dry, dusty way, but interacting as his disciples did with his spirit. This is a controversial thing to tell people to read, but I take my chances. There is a non-Christian writer, Khalil Gibran, who's mostly famous for his book, The Prophet, which is not about Jesus.
Mm.
He did write a book about Jesus that I think might be the most powerful, kind of evocative sense of his spirit I've ever read. So it's called Jesus, the Son of Man. It's by Khalil Gibran. Typically, you'll just find it in a hardback edition because it's not in print anymore. But it's these short vignettes. Sometimes they're from people like Simon Peter. Sometimes it'll be from someone who doesn't like Jesus and they're describing what they really hate about him. But I would guess there's maybe 150 of these vignettes in this book, and they are so stunning. And they are not scripture, but when you read them, I would say you then go back to the Gospels and unlock something in terms of, I always picture like a scene, let's say like Luke 5, where Peter and Andrew and James and John get called. When I read Gibran and then I reread Luke 5 and I see that calling scene, it's like I can like smell it and I can, that sea air around me. There's just something so powerfully unlocked by Gibran. So I often say that one. I'm a big fan of Andrew Murray. I love his, he's a South African pastor from, turn of the last century, I guess, even earlier than that. George MacDonald, I'd love him
Oh, yeah.
deeply. But I would
How
say,
about
yeah, Gibran and a couple of those hit very hard for me.
so this was
Yes, ma'am.
translation by J.B. Phillips was new to me
Yes.
from you and Jenny.
Yeah.
But I am fascinated by it. You
Mm.
guys use it most Sundays,
Mm-hmm.
and just the wording of it in the Gospels and the New Testament are so relatable. Like I I know there's a story behind this, which is
Right.
really cool. So I'd love for you
Yeah.
to share, like, how did you come across this? And
Yes.
then now, like, what is the fun story behind it?
Absolutely. When I was probably 20-ish years old, I got involved with Young Life. That particular translation has a great lineage with Young Life all the way back to the 1950s, 60s, because it was one of the first modern translations of the New Testament. So I was given a copy by a dear friend, Rob Crawford, who is one of my dear friends to this day. And it's right behind me on that bookshelf, his particular copy completely tattered now. So the backstory is J.B. Phillips was a Cambridge classics scholar. He was a young, I guess he would have been a vicar by the time he was translating. But during the Blitz period, he was in London. He was ministering mostly to youth, and he realized that when they would read what we call the King James, or what they call the Authorized Version, young people were like, "What are we talking about? We don't
Mm.
understand these wordings." Well, here's a guy with a classic scholarship. And so he begins to translate. He started in Colossians, and it's a great story because he translates Colossians. He shows it around, of course, to these teenagers, but also to other friends who are knowledgeable. Someone gets it into the hands of C.S. Lewis, and then
Oh, wow.
Lewis writes J.B. Phillips a letter. It's actually in one of his like first editions. Lewis says, it was like looking through a glass that had been freshly cleaned. And so it's this
Mhm.
sense of like, the words are coming completely alive to me, to C.S. Lewis. And so he
Mm.
encouraged Phillips to keep going. And so then eventually he released, I believe, first it would have been just some of the epistles, then eventually it was all the gospels, and then eventually it was the entire New Testament. And back in, let's see, it would have been probably the 60s, 70s, it was one of the biggest selling translations in the world. I mean, it sold millions of copies. Young Life people loved it because it was very easy to speak from. It really just kind of rolled off the tongue. And then, as things do, for whatever reason, in the these 90s, I would say it just sort of disappeared. I became passionate about it, like I said, when I was 20-ish. Just started finding copies in used bookstores, and I would just collect them. So I'd have like bookshelves of just that New Testament. I would give them to people. So then fast forward, I don't know, maybe 10 or so years ago, my mother had a book on her bookshelf of his, and it was not a translation. It was just a meditation on the early church. I didn't know he had written this. So I read it, and it's called New Testament Christianity. And I was
Mm.
blown away. I just thought it was one of the most beautiful pictures of the early church. So a friend and I realized it was in the public domain. It had gone out of print. So we, uploaded it to Kindle as an ebook. And I wrote just a little foreword, this is a book that deserves to be reread and found all over again. And we put it out on Kindle, and it sold a few copies. Well, then maybe a couple years later, I get an email, and this is a great moment for me because I'm dealing in danger all the time. So I'm like, who knows if I'm infringing on copyright law?
Right.
Here's this book. I get an
Mhm.
email that was very vague, and it said, "Are you the Eugene Luning who re-released New Testament Christianity?" And I thought it was a copyright attorney. So I was like being very careful when I responded. Yeah, I am, but and then the email comes back, and it was J.B. Phillips' grandson. And
Mhm.
he said, "I am trying to find people to help me bring back into the line of sight this wonderful translation of the
Mm.
scriptures. Why don't we be friends?" And so he is a Brit, but he lives in the States now. So within about a month, he and his family flew up here to Colorado, and we spent a long weekend together. I saw him a couple months ago. He was in Denver. And so it's been sort of his passion and my side passion just to make sure that people are aware of this beautiful translation. So that was a
Mm.
long version, but that is my kind of wild-eyed love for J.B. Phillips and his translation.
No, I love it. I love the story because it just is the way God works is so
That's right.
endearing. And
Yes.
I mean, he makes it obvious like, this
Mm.
is what you should do. This guy
Yes.
found you, and here you go. Another friend that
I
shares your
agree.
passion.
You would love Peter. Peter Croft. He is wonderful.
I love your knowledge on books and all things Jesus, and just very honored and grateful that you share what you do. I mean, you
Mm.
don't have to, and how your story and Jenny's story together have unfolded to share your knowledge and your love of Jesus. So,
Thank you.
for me and for many others, thank you. I know a lot of young people have been impacted and are still being impacted. Even our church, we have so many young adults that just get inspired by you and your love
Thank
for
you.
Jesus. So,
I'm honored by it. I'm grateful for you.
well, thank you. Thank you for being here and for all the knowledge. Now I'm going to go look up all the books
Love it.
and the
That's
names.
a good use of the rest of your day.
I'm just building my list of So many things that I
That's
need to do.
wonderful.
But
Love it.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Hey, you too.